Formula One is often described as the pinnacle of motorsport, a place where innovation, precision, and competition define everything. But behind the trophies and technology, another contest has always existed. One that rarely appears on timing screens. Because in Formula One, speed is not created only on the track. It is created in engineering offices, in interpretation of technical wording, and sometimes, in the spaces the regulations fail to cover. Throughout its history, the sport has been shaped by moments when teams went beyond building faster cars and began testing the limits of what the rules truly allowed. From fuel systems and weight regulations to software, pit equipment, and race strategy itself, Formula One has repeatedly been forced to confront uncomfortable questions about how far innovation can go before it becomes something else. In this video, we're going to look at some of the most serious cases of deception, manipulation, and regulatory controversy in Formula One history. Episodes that changed results, damaged reputations, and forced the sport to rethink how it polices itself. But before we begin, if you're interested in classic motorsport and racing history, you can subscribe to the channel for more content like this. So, let's start. The frozen fuel trick. In the mid-1980s, at the peak of Formula One's turbo era, the sport reached power levels never seen before. Qualifying engines were producing well over 1,000 horsepower, turning the cars into brutally fast and increasingly dangerous machines. At the same time, teams without turbo engines were becoming uncompetitive, unable to fight on equal terms. Trying to address both safety concerns and the widening performance gap, the FIA introduced a fuel tank limit of 220 liters for turbo-powered cars, hoping it would force teams to reduce boost and slow down. What the rules failed to define, however, was temperature. Engineers quickly realized that a liter measures volume, not mass. When gasoline is cooled, it becomes denser, allowing more fuel to be squeezed into the same 220-liter space. By chilling fuel to around minus 30 degrees Celsius, teams were effectively loading more usable energy than intended, without technically breaking the volume restriction. This trick created a serious danger. A Formula One car generates extreme heat. Once on track, the supercooled fuel warmed rapidly and began to expand. To prevent the tank from reaching its structural limit, drivers were instructed to push flat out from the opening laps, burning fuel aggressively to create empty space inside the tank. Instead of slowing the cars down, the regulation had pushed them to maximum attack precisely to avoid a potential rupture. When the FIA became aware of the practice, it threatened mass disqualifications. The maneuver violated the very purpose of the rule and exposed a major loophole. There was no reference temperature for fuel measurement. That gap was later closed. Modern regulations now strictly control fuel temperature, allowing only minimal variation within defined limits. Benetton's Refueling Rig Controversy. The 1994 Formula One season opened under tension. Electronic driver aids had just been banned, refueling had returned, and pit stops suddenly became a decisive performance weapon. Almost immediately, doubts appeared. At the season opener in Brazil, Ayrton Senna entered the pit lane ahead of Michael Schumacher. Schumacher emerged in front. The difference was not traffic or timing. It was the stop itself. Engineers soon noticed something unsettling. Benetton's refueling times were consistently shorter. Not marginally, but visibly and repeatedly. No regulation had been clearly broken. No illegal mechanism could be seen. Yet the pattern remained. As races passed, quiet concerns turned into open suspicion. Rival teams focused not on the drivers, but on Benetton's equipment. Everything erupted at the German Grand Prix. During a routine stop, Jos Verstappen's Benetton was suddenly engulfed in flames as fuel sprayed across the car and onto the hot exhaust. Mechanics caught fire. Verstappen leapt from the cockpit as the pit lane vanished into smoke. The FIA immediately seized Benetton's refueling rig. When the manufacturer dismantled it, the finding was unambiguous. The internal safety filter had been removed. That filter not only stopped debris, it also restricted fuel flow. Without it, fuel could pass around 12.5% faster, cutting pit stops by over a second. The supplier confirmed the part was not missing by accident. There was no technical reason to remove it. The only way it could be gone was if the team had taken it out. The FIA publicly confirmed the modification. But under the wording of the regulations, it could not be proven as a direct sporting offense. Benetton was ordered to refit the filter. No race bans followed. The Brabham water tank system. The 1982 season began with another major shift in Formula One's technical direction. After months of protests from FOCO-aligned teams, FISA softened the ride height rules introduced a year earlier. Sliding skirts were still banned, but cars were once again allowed to run lower, restoring much of the lost ground effect performance. For Brabham, the new season also marked a bold gamble: the debut of the turbocharged BMW engine in Gordon Murray's BT50. Although fast, it proved unreliable, retiring both cars at Kyalami. With the turbo project sent back into development, Brabham revived the Cosworth-powered BT49 in updated D-spec form. Lacking turbo power, it was vulnerable on the straights. Murray again turned to the regulations. At the time, cars were weighed with all fluids included. Naturally aspirated cars could be built lighter than turbos, but the high minimum weight forced teams to add ballast, erasing that advantage. Murray's solution was both clever and controversial. The BT49D carried large water tanks inside the side pods, officially declared part of a brake cooling system. Before the race, the tanks were filled so the car passed scrutineering. During the Grand Prix, the water was gradually released, making the car lighter with every lap. After the finish, the rules allowed lost fluids to be replaced, and Brabham simply refilled the tanks. The effect was immediate. At the 1982 Brazilian Grand Prix in Jacarepaguá, Nelson Piquet won in brutal heat, ahead of Keke Rosberg's Williams, which used a similar system. After the race, officials ordered the water drained. Both cars were found underweight and were disqualified. The system was banned on the spot, the rules rewritten, and the incident became one of the most audacious loopholes ever exploited in Formula One. The water ballast scandal. In 1984, Tyrrell became the center of one of the most severe scandals in Formula One history. While the grid was dominated by turbocharged monsters, Tyrrell stood alone as the only full-time team still using the naturally aspirated Cosworth DFV. The power deficit was enormous, but the regulations offered an opening. At the time, Formula One enforced a strict minimum weight limit, measured with all operating fluids on board. Because turbo cars were heavier, the minimum weight was set higher than what Tyrrell's lightweight 012 chassis truly required. That created an opportunity. A car could pass scrutineering at the legal limit, then run much lighter once the race was underway. Tyrrell installed a large water tank, officially declared as part of an engine water injection and brake cooling system. Before the race, the tank was filled so the car met the minimum weight. During the Grand Prix, the water was gradually used or released, meaning the car spent most of the race significantly underweight, improving acceleration, braking, and tire life. After Martin Brundle finished a stunning second at the Detroit Grand Prix, officials investigated more closely. They found that Tyrrell had refilled the system after the race with a mixture containing water and lead shot, apparently to restore weight before inspection. The FIA ruled that this constituted illegal movable ballast, unauthorized refueling, and a breach of fuel regulations. The punishment was unprecedented. Under FIA President Jean-Marie Bales-Trey, Tyrrell were excluded from the entire 1984 World Championship. Every result was erased. All points were stripped. The team was barred from the remaining races, and the season was rewritten as if Tyrrell had never existed. Brabham's Hydropneumatic Suspension. The Brabham BT49 had come painfully close to success in its first full championship season. In 1980, Nelson Piquet emerged as team leader and carried the title fight deep into the year, only to be beaten by Alan Jones and the formidable Williams squad. For Brabham, 1981 opened with both renewed hope and an approaching technical storm. That winter, FISA announced a regulation aimed directly at ground effect cars. Alarmed by rising cornering speeds, officials mandated a minimum ride height of 6 centimeters to be checked in the pit lane. The objective was to weaken sliding skirts and ultra-low setups that sealed airflow beneath the cars and generated extreme downforce. Many FOCO-aligned teams were furious. Brabham shared the concern, but Gordon Murray saw an opportunity. Studying the wording, he noticed a decisive detail: ride height would only be measured in the pits. There was no requirement for the car to remain at that height on track. From this, Murray devised a system that allowed the BT-49C to pass inspection legally, then lower itself automatically at speed. Any driver-controlled mechanism was banned, so the solution relied purely on aerodynamics. As velocity increased, downforce compressed the suspension until the car squatted low enough for pads beneath the side pods to touch the track. At that point, ground effect took over, effectively fixing the car in its optimal attitude. After the race, Piquet would slow on the in-lap. As downforce faded, the suspension rose back to its natural position, clearing the height check. Once perfected, the BT-49C became the reference car. Through 1981, Piquet combined consistency with a decisive aerodynamic edge, while rivals rushed to imitate the concept, often with cruder, legally dubious systems. The season ended with Piquet as world champion, and the BT-49C entered history as one of the most intelligent machines of the ground effect era. A car that didn't defy the rules, but reshaped them through engineering. The traction control question. In 1994, Formula One entered a technical gray zone. What followed was not, at least at first, a clear act of cheating, but the emergence of ingenious engineering solutions that flirted with the regulations while trying to control wheel spin without using the electronic traction control systems that had just been banned. That season began with a regulatory revolution. Active suspension, traction control, launch control, and fully automatic gearboxes were outlawed overnight. The FIA's message was simple: the drivers were back in charge. Yet almost immediately, doubts appeared. Some cars seemed unusually stable on corner exits and remarkably consistent off the line. Ayrton Senna was among those quietly raising concerns inside the paddock. After the San Marino Grand Prix, the FIA demanded source code from several teams. Benetton and McLaren were fined for delays, and the software was sent to independent specialists. The investigation uncovered a hidden function inside Benetton's ECU, later known as Option 13. It contained routines consistent with launch control and traction-style intervention, invisible in normal menus but accessible through a computer connection. The finding proved one thing: the system existed. It did not prove it had been used. Months of analysis produced no data trace, no logs, and no repeatable evidence. Under the sporting code, suspicion was not enough. No sporting penalty followed. Later, former Benetton aerodynamicist Willem Todt explained that what rivals perceived as traction control may have been legal engine strategies instead. By shaping torque curves, throttle response, and gear-dependent power delivery, Benetton could make wheel spin harder to provoke without the ECU actively intervening. So 1994 left Formula One with a lasting technical paradox. Prohibited functions were found in software, their use was never proven, and alongside them existed legal systems that closely mimicked what traction control once did. The fallout permanently changed how ECUs would be monitored and regulated. Honda and the fuel ballast scandal. In 2005, Formula One believed the era of weight manipulation was over. Minimum weight limits were strict, fuel systems were tightly regulated, and post-race inspections had become increasingly rigorous. That certainty collapsed after the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, when Jenson Button's Honda was called for deeper scrutiny. At first, the car appeared legal. It passed the initial weighing. But FIA technical delegate Joe Bauer ordered the fuel system to be completely drained. Once the main tank was emptied, the car immediately fell below the minimum weight. Bauer argued that a small internal section of the fuel cell could never be fully drained under normal running conditions, and that the remaining fuel should be considered unusable. Therefore, they claimed, it should still count toward the car's weight. The FIA disagreed. A detailed investigation revealed the bar featured a two-stage internal fuel system. One chamber supplied the engine. The other could retain fuel that effectively acted as ballast after the race. In practical terms, the car could run underweight on track, then appear legal only when fuel remained inside this secondary compartment. The case was sent to the FIA International Court of Appeal. The judges ruled that the design allowed fuel to function as movable ballast, which is strictly forbidden. Their conclusion was clear: the car did not meet the minimum weight requirement in race condition. Barr was disqualified from the San Marino Grand Prix, stripped of all points, and banned from the next two races. It became one of the harshest technical penalties of the modern era. The ruling permanently reshaped how fuel systems were inspected, how unusable fuel was defined, and how aggressively the FIA would treat any design that blurred the line between fuel and ballast. The Spygate. In 2007, Formula One was locked in a technological arms race. Aerodynamics, cooling systems, tire behavior and weight distribution had become so complex that information itself was now one of the sport's most valuable weapons. That year, McLaren would be found in possession of something no wind tunnel or simulator could ever legally deliver. The case began in Italy. Ferrari employee Nigel Stepney had fallen out with the team's management. At the same time, McLaren chief designer Mike Coughlin was discovered to be holding a 780-page dossier of confidential Ferrari technical documents. The material covered virtually every area of the car, from suspension layouts to aerodynamic concepts, gearbox design, and brake systems. The scandal surfaced only because Coughlin's wife attempted to have the documents photocopied at a local print shop. The owner found the content suspicious and contacted Ferrari, who immediately launched legal action. The FIA opened a formal investigation. In July, the World Motorsport Council ruled that although Coughlin possessed Ferrari data, there was not yet enough proof that McLaren had used it. The season continued. Weeks later, internal emails emerged. Messages between McLaren engineers and drivers directly referenced Ferrari information, including tire construction and aerodynamic details. The evidence showed the data was circulating inside the team. In September 2007, McLaren was summoned again. This time, the verdict was historic. The FIA ruled that McLaren had illegally possessed Ferrari intellectual property and compromised the integrity of the championship. McLaren was excluded from the 2007 Constructors' Championship, all points were erased, and the team was fined $100 million. The drivers kept their points. The team paid the price. Spygate permanently reshaped how Formula One protects data, regulates information flow, and polices technical secrecy. The Singapore 2008 Crashgate Scandal. The first Singapore Grand Prix in 2008 was meant to showcase a new era of Formula One. The sport's first night race, staged under floodlights, was designed as a global spectacle. What nobody knew that evening was that the outcome had already been manipulated. On lap 15, Nelson Piquet Jr.'s Renault hit the wall at turn 17 in an unusual single-car accident. The location made a safety car inevitable. Moments earlier, Fernando Alonso had made an abnormally early pit stop after a fuel rig problem, a strategy that should have ruined his race. Instead, the safety car closed the pit lane and trapped much of the field on heavy fuel. Alonso, already stopped, gained massive track position amid pit lane chaos and went on to win. At the time, the crash was treated as driver error. The result stood. 1 year later, everything changed. After being dismissed by Renault, Piquet Jr. approached the FIA and gave a formal statement. He claimed the crash had been deliberate and ordered by team principal Flavio Briatore and engineering director Pat Simons. The FIA launched a full investigation, examining telemetry, radio traffic, and witness testimony. In September 2009, the World Motorsport Council delivered its verdict. Renault had conspired to deliberately cause a crash to manipulate the race outcome. The team admitted the scheme. Renault received a suspended disqualification. Briatore was banned from FIA-sanctioned events. Simons received a multi-year suspension. Piquet Jr. was granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Crashgate became the first modern case in which Formula One officially acknowledged that a Grand Prix had been deliberately fixed. The scandal permanently changed race control procedures, internal reporting policies, and how the sport polices team conduct. Ferrari and the fuel flow mystery. In 2019, Ferrari produced the most powerful engine of the hybrid era. On the straights, the red cars were untouchable. Rivals quickly noticed that Ferrari was gaining speed where others could not, often without the usual aerodynamic compromises. Inside the paddock, one question dominated the season. Where was the power coming from? Suspicion focused on fuel flow, one of the most tightly regulated areas of modern Formula One. Since 2014, The amount of fuel entering the engine had been limited and monitored by FIA-mandated sensors. Several teams believed Ferrari had found a way to exploit how those sensors measured flow, not by removing them, but by manipulating how the signals were interpreted. Throughout the second half of 2019, the FIA issued a series of technical directives clarifying electrical interference, pressure oscillations, and sensor behavior. Each clarification narrowed what was allowed. As they appeared, Ferrari's straight-line advantage steadily declined. Behind the scenes, the FIA had already launched a formal technical investigation into Ferrari's power unit. Data logs, hardware responses, and sensor readings were analyzed. The process continued through the winter. In February 2020, the FIA announced it had concluded the investigation and reached a confidential settlement with Ferrari. The statement confirmed that issues serious enough to warrant action had been identified, but that they could not be conclusively proven under the existing regulatory framework. The terms were sealed. What followed was public. The FIA rewrote power unit regulations, strengthened monitoring procedures, and introduced a second fuel flow sensor. 7 teams formally protested the secrecy of the agreement. Ferrari denied wrongdoing. But on track in 2020, the change was clear. Straight-line speed vanished, customer teams fell back, and the once dominant engine became one of the weakest. No verdict was published. No method was named. But Formula One changed the rules, the clearest sign that a line had been found and crossed.